All right, guys. So most of us listening to this podcast, we are all in the single family world, but a lot of you have dreams of stepping it up, going big, Grant Cardone style, right? Step into the apartment world. So we got a guest on here today that actually has done this. So he can help you duplicate, replicate, and dominate, as we say in our business. So what we're going to talk about is how he was a single family investor from 2005, did very well in this business, and transitioned in 2013 to buying apartments. He's from EBG Acquisitions. Let me introduce you to my guest, Jospeh Gozlan. How you doing, Joseph?
Doing great, Connor. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on here, and I like what you're doing. I know that you've had a successful career, and you like to pay it forward. So you kind of want to share what you've been doing, because a lot of people want to make that leap into multifamily. You've done it. So let's kind of break through this process here. Let's go ahead and introduce you a little bit further right now and talk about kind of what you did when you started your business with a single family.
Yeah, so like a lot of people out there, I became a landlord kind of accidentally. My wife and I were living in a small apartment, and then we kind of got married, tried to find something to buy, and then we bought a property that was too big for us, right? We had no kids. It was just a couple of young couple. So we said, maybe we'll just rent it out for a couple of years before we move in. And then we never moved in, right? It just became our first rental. And then kind of happened to come across Rich Dad Poor Dad, and then everything else is history from there. But that's how I got started.
I mean, that's a pretty common story that I hear. I mean, that happens to a lot of people. And to be honest, I mean, it's a great opportunity for a lot of people who thought it was a major headache where, you know, they're moving out, they couldn't, sell it or whatever. They may not have enough equity in the house to sell it. And then they got frustrated, so all they could do was rent it. But it became a huge blessing in disguise because it led them to get into real estate. And then here you are 15 years later buying apartments, right? So how many houses were you buying? Like, did you build up a big single-family portfolio? Or people always want to know, when's it time to make that leap? When's it time to jump up to the big time, right? Should they buy 100 houses? Should they buy one house? Because some people go straight from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour and buy apartments right away. Let's kind of talk about how you built your portfolio and then kind of when you made that jump.
Yeah, so honestly, it's not an evolutional linear step, right? You got to hit 100 houses and then you can go buy 100 apartment complex. It doesn't work this way. We got to 5 single families when I realized that's not scalable. That's not for me. I can't handle that. There is a lot about conversations about cash flow, right? But if you don't keep your reserves on the side and get ready for surprises, because they do come, that's just life, right? Sure. And then you end up losing the house. And a lot of the single family investors that I've met over the years have owned one property, ran into a surprise at some point, and then just gave up because nobody told them about risks and how to mitigate risk. And guess what? That roof is going to go at some point, whether you like it or not, whether it's a hailstorm or it's just been 15 years since they put it, right? That water heater will burst 5, 6, 7 years in, and I haven't met a single landlord that just goes out and replaces a water heater that is just fine and working.
Yep.
Right? So that's really where the traditional thought process of, I got to go to a big portfolio before I buy an apartment complex, it's not there.
Yep.
Right? It did, however, help me to get to the point where I've accumulated enough equity in these properties so I could refinance, get the equity out, and then buy my first apartment complex. Right? So in that perspective, that happened. But if you have the cash or you have the way to bring in partners with the down payment, you don't have to wait.
Yep. So we'll go on through the whole process of kind of how you fund these deals. But you brought up an important part for single family investors, or really any investor at all, whether you're flipping houses or not. You need to have reserves. And because if you don't, for example, here just a few weeks ago, I had a rental property that there was a mix up with our insurance, and I thought I had a certain coverage and I didn't. And we had a sewage backup and it flooded the property, and the tenant wasn't there, and it flooded the whole property. It ended up being 11 grand out of pocket. And if I didn't have that money saved up, that house would have sat there, and I owe a mortgage payment on it. I bought the house direct to the seller. I owe that seller $500 a month. And what would I do, right? I'd be in a tough spot.
Exactly.
So it's important to always understand that, guys. So let's so you did very well in the single family world as far as equity purposes, enough to get into your first apartment deal. Let's talk about that first apartment deal and kind of what made you, decide, hey, we're going to go for apartments now? Because obviously, single family world is for some people, but a lot of people get that I got to go big mentality. So let's talk about that a little bit.
So first of all, I've always had the I'd like to go big mentality. This is
That's right. One to
it's a good
have.
mentality to have. Um, the the real transitions happen when in a hot market like we are today, it's really hard to find a deal. And when we're talking about the smaller apartments, the 15, 20, 30 units, the competition is even harder because there's a lot of investors out there that, again, see that as an evolutionary step. If I want 300 units, I got to stop on the way in the 20 units, 50 unit, 150 units, and then I'll get to 300, which is also a myth. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I got to the point where I was looking for apartments, and first of all, commercial real estate is not like residential, right? If you want to get the attention from the commercial brokers, it's a lot of work. You got to really convince them that you're a worthy buyer and not a tire kicker, because there's a lot of tire kickers out there. And I'm talking from experience because I'm a licensed broker as well, and we only do commercial. And there's a lot of people that will just start a conversation and then disappear or never follow through or don't do their homework. So what I had to do is work really, really hard to form those relationships with other brokers, even though I'm a broker, right? And try to get them to show me deals, right? And then what I noticed is that I get the deals with everybody else, right? Marcus and Milachep will send that apartment complex to 300,000 people. So there's a lot of competition there. So I got to the point where I said, you know what? I'm going to source the deal myself. So I did marketing, direct mail and postcards and phone calls, and I knocked on doors until I found, I talked to a few sellers along the way until I found one that was willing to show me the property. And then we got into conversation, and I actually got him to help me with a seller financing deal.
Okay.
So we bought our first apartment complex was through a seller financing deal.
So that's pretty common from what I understand, is that a lot of times you get the seller to carry back on these big deals because the financing can be difficult and sometimes they're having trouble selling them. But you brought up something important that, most people don't go and do their own marketing for these deals. They are working with brokers. So that's pretty common, right? The traditional process is to go to these brokers. But if you don't have a big name and big pull, they're not going to just let you into their small circle. It's like going to a party that you're not invited to. And so that's why it's tough for people. But you did what you had to do, and you broke out there and started marketing these individuals. Now, is that still how you're finding most of your deals, or are you working with brokers now? Have you kind of broken through that barrier?
So we do everything, right? So this is it's kind of a snowball business. The more you do, the more you get opportunities. And just to help let people have a little sneak peek behind the scene on that one is most of the brokers in commercial space do 2 to 3 transactions a year. Now, keep in mind, their commissions are 6 figures, right? But they only get 2 to 3 transactions a year. Now, that's the majority of them. If that would be you and you only get 2 or 3 opportunities a year, who would you let in as a buyer, right? You want the buyer that have the highest chance of closing the transaction. And the more experience and the more operational experience, the higher the chances that this buyer will close the deal. So that's why first-time buyers have a challenge getting through to those brokers. So a little trick. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say it makes sense that that seller is counting and trusting that broker because they can pick any broker to represent them. And if that broker brings them a buyer that they didn't really do their due diligence on, and they back out, that seller's carrying that property. It costs them money. Plus, they could lose faith in that broker, and that broker could lose a lot of money if they cancel the agreement with them, depending on how their agreement was. And so, yeah, it's very important. So if they don't think you're going to close, this is the same thing that happens with people who are buying directly from the bank, buying tapes, buying lots of notes at a time. You kind of have to build up that relationship over time before they kind of let you in to see the real good deals. So let's kind of look at how you approach things. You brought up you can go for 10 unit, 30 unit, 50 unit, 150 unit, whatever. But most people are talking about, economies of scale. Usually 150 units on up is where, most people are looking. But there's opportunity in all these different points, size points, of units. Where did you kind of start out? What was your first deal? Like, how big was it? Kind of what were the numbers that you paid for it? Let's kind of go through that and explain it to people so they can kind of get a good idea.
Yeah, so I started up with a 22 unit. It was, and again, I was looking like everybody else in the C class, trying to find an older property that I can do a value add, but I just happened to land on a 22 units A class property in Salina, right? It was built in 2007, granite countertop, really beautiful property. And that seller was reasonable. He's 80 years old. He's ready to kind of move on. And the cool thing was that he built the property himself, right? So he knew everything about the property. And we kind of built rapport. And you said it, the key word in this business earlier, and that's relationship. This business is entirely built around relationships. So we built that relationship with the broker, with the seller, and got a really good deal buying it. And the value add that we were able to bring in was in the management, right? He's 80 years old. He was half managing on his own, half using a realtor. He had tenants 10 years in the property or 9 years in the property that he hasn't raised rent on. All the apartments were individually metered for water, but he was paying the water bills for everyone. So there was a lot of value in there that we could extract.
So what's interesting about what you brought up here is that the guy was 80 years old. We have students all around the country. When we're talking about owner financing on single family properties, on the sell side is what most people think about, but we buy a lot of houses direct from the seller on owner financing, and it's hard to get people to go make that offer because they're scared they're not going to take it, especially with an older individual, because they're thinking, if I'm going to offer them, whatever the terms are over 15 years and they're 80, they may not want to take that offer. But we've had sellers sell us their house on payments, in the 80s, just like this, which is interesting because you'd think that would never happen, especially in the industry that you're, or in the area or arena that you're in. You need to get seller financing a lot of times, or they can carry back part of the loan because you're having to raise a lot of money. So how much of that property, when all said and done, I mean, with the value add, how much does it cash flow a month?
So we bought it for 1.6. We are about to refinance it at the end of this month at a 2.1 million valuation.
It's not bad. It's not bad.
Not bad, right?
Yep.
So basically, we'll be pulling most of our money out. So our cash on cash would be fantastic on that one. It cash flows a few thousands a month, depends on the month, depends on our occupancy. This is where the 22 versus 100 is coming into effect, because if we have 2 vacants, then we have low 90s vacancy, right? Occupancy, sorry. But when you have 100, you can have 5, 6, 7 of them off, and you're still in the mid 90s. So that's where the larger you go, the more units you can spread your risk across.
Okay, great. So let's talk about how to look at what a deal is and how to kind of value it and how you're looking, because people listening to this may not even understand what we're talking about by a value add play. So you can buy an older property, a distressed property, force the value up by repairing it or fixing it, but you're talking about a different value add play where you're just kind of coming in and rehabbing the management, rehabbing the processes, or adding things to the property like, who knows, laundromats or Coke machines. There's lots of different things you can add that just kind of help here and there. When you're looking at these properties, are you looking to buy them value added, or a lot of apartment buyers only want to buy, say, I want to know it's cash flowing day one, and that's kind of their mindset? Because when you're buying value added plays, it opens up more risk, because if you're wrong with your numbers and you're not as experienced, that's where you can get into trouble, right?
Yeah. So this is where let's talk about valuation for a second, right? This is where this world is very different from the single family home, right? Your property, you live in Plano, right? Let's say you have a 4-bedroom house, it's worth $400,000, right? If everybody on your street drinks some crazy drink and decide to get divorced, right? And they all sell in distress at $350, well, guess what? What's your house worth right now? 350. Because when an appraiser comes in, he looks at the comps, he looks at the other sales on your neighborhood, and that's going to be the determining factor of your property, and you have no control over it. When we evaluate a multifamily property, the formula is net operating income divided by cap rate. That's the value. Now, you don't have a lot of control over cap rate because that's more of a regional thing, but the net operating income is composed of total income less total expenses. So you have two ways to influence your NOI. You can increase income, and that goes by increasing rent or by finding alternative income sources like leasing out laundry machines or putting vending machines or putting up a billboard on your property if it's visible on a highway, right? Anything that generates income helps. And then on the other side, you can reduce expenses because the formula is income less expenses. So if I can save money on management, I can save money on getting a better contract with the waste management company, I can save money on any different aspect of the operation of the property, then I increase my NOI. I have direct control over what my property is valued just by playing those two sides, right? So that goes to what you were talking about. I will look at a property and I will evaluate what can I do for this thing, because on any other market, right? If we were at a buyer's market at the bottom of the market, you're right. You just buy for cash flow and everything is awesome. But on a seller's market, most of the time, sellers of multifamily are more sophisticated. It's not grandma that lives in a house and wants to sell because she's moving next to the grandkids, right? So they know the market is hot. They're getting phone calls and letters from more than one person. Trust me, you're not the only one, right? So they know what the property is worth. So you will get it at a very high price with not a lot of meat on the bone, if you want to look at it. But a value add play helps you look at it and say, okay, today it's worth this much, and I can make it worth this much, right? I can make it worth a lot more. So for us, when we evaluate a property, it's what can we make the property be worth, let's say in a year? What is it going to take us to get there, right? In terms of capital expenses, I'm going to have to paint it. I'm going to have to bring in new washing machines. I'm going to have to put a new gym, whatever I have to do, right? Then I look at what is my time worth? If I'm going to invest a lot of time and effort in that year, what is my time worth? And that's what we can offer on the property.
Yep. So
we measure the future value versus what is it going to cost us to get there, time and money, and that's what we're willing to pay today.
Okay, so when you're looking at these deals, I'm sure you've analyzed a lot of them. Your probably conversion rate's very low compared to a single family investor because you don't have to buy a lot of them. When you're looking at them and analyzing them, and you're seeing these, I guess you could say, leaks in the game of these other investors that own them, where are the most common value-added plays that these other apartment owners are missing that they're not capitalizing on? Obviously, a lot of them are asking way too little for rent. What you just brought up, the guys wasn't making them pay, the water. So there's different, ways that you can set up, internally where you can pay the bills or they can pay the bills. Let's talk about where the big profit centers are that someone looking for apartments should be looking for, that people are usually missing that own apartments already.
Yeah, so the main expenses in everybody's life, it doesn't matter if you own a bakery, a single family or a multifamily, right, are taxes and payroll, right? So these are the two main ones. You got to always protest your county taxes, right? Especially in our area, Collin County is just brutally increasing the taxes year over year. And then payroll is really in this world converts into management efficiency, right? How do we get this? Collections is a strong thing, right? Do you let them wait all the way to the 25th of the month? That's most of the month that money is not working for you, right? And it's working for them. So getting collections, getting the tenants to pay on time is important. Other places is just poor management. And I'm a big believer in karma. And I say karma is good for business, right? So we buy B and C class apartment complexes, which is lower level of income, right? Blue collar, the people that work in retail and janitorial and these kind of positions. And what I've learned is that if we build communities, if we give them a great place to live in, and a great doesn't have to be sparkly and shiny. Great needs to be safe, needs to be dignified, needs to have good customer service. When they have a work order, make sure you get there in time, right? And it comes back and it pays back tenfold, right? We bought a property that the entire exterior lights were out. Do you feel the tenants and the residents feel safe at night? Do you feel that they would recommend their friends to come in? Of course not, right? So the first thing we did when we bought the property, the very first day we took over, I had electricians out come out and install brand new LED lights all over the place, right? And sometimes you have things that are not in your control, right? We had water heater, water lines leak. So we had to shut off water 3 days in a row during the day, right? It's very inconvenient to our residents. But what we did is we're not telling them, well, what do you want, right? It's the plumbers. What we did is we got them water and we got them breakfast and we got them dinner, right? We did everything to say, hey, look, we know it's very inconvenient. We feel it. Here's the least we can do for that, right?
Yep. So I really like that approach. I think you got the right thinking behind it. Let's kind of look, so the income value approach, we're not so much looking at the valuation of the property, even though that plays a huge part of it when you come back to finance out and pull money out, or when you're taking the property down, but you're looking at the income as far as the rents. And I know a lot of people have asked me in the past, how do I find the rents on an apartment? Are y'all going and looking at the other apartments in the area, going and talking to them directly to find out, can you find this information on the MLS like you could a normal single family? And is it accurate? Because I think a lot of investors in the single family world are asking way too low for their rents. And here's the reason why: because people who go to a real estate agent in the single family world don't know how to rent their own properties. So if you go on the MLS, that may be 1,000, 1,000, 1,000, where on that property, I'm getting my properties rented on my own, probably for 1,100 or even 1,200, and that's not going to show up on the MLS. So let's look at how to calculate rent rates, because this is very, very important, because just a $50 more a month rent on an apartment when you have 100 units, it's huge on the valuation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the power of multipliers, right? That's why we do multifamily. So it goes a few ways, right? The first thing is whoever is selling the property would usually give you a rent roll. So you'll get the list of all the residents and all the apartment sizes and types, right? 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and you'll get what they're currently paying for rent and what the seller thinks the market value is, right? Then we also do a market survey where we actually walk into other properties in the area, pretend to be buyers or residents, and ask what they're leasing for. Concessions, right? Free first month or free move-in or move-in specials are also things you have to consider. And then lastly, in the commercial world, we have systems like Yardi and other systems that basically does that same survey market and brings you back those results. If you work with a commercial broker, he can get you those numbers. Don't take them as gospel, because all they do is they make phone calls and say, hey, how much is a 2 bedroom, right? And at some point, the leasing agents learn to recognize when it's one of those surveys, right? So, but you take all these numbers and you compile them, right? And then you figure out what's the right number that you believe in. Another factor is that what do we believe we can do, right? So a minute ago, I told you that we believe in creating communities, not just managing apartment complexes. It usually translates to a premium in our rent. So we charge even slightly higher than everybody else in our area, but people are willing to pay it because we give them a lot more for their money. So all these things comes into play. I always say downplay it, right? You better be under promise over deliver, right?
Yep.
So just downplay it as much as you can to make yourself safe. And if it's coming up a little bit higher, great. It's cherry on top.
I like that. That's how I do everything. I run numbers real conservative, because if it's a deal on a conservative number, and then a deal goes well, it's like you said, it's just even more profit there that you assume that you're going to get. But if you're counting on this, it's kind of like, buying on appreciation. A lot of investors do this and they speculate, but that's dangerous. So you want to buy on the present numbers. If it works now and it does go up, hey, it's just extra bonus on top. So you get the good numbers that you can believe in on rents, and you have all the numbers on the property. Let's look at the next part of the valuation. So this is something that's always been a question of mine. Y'all aren't going in every single unit, or are you? So say on a 150 unit property, are you? And because if I know I own that property and it's 150 units and I have 100 plus people in there, and I don't know that you're 100% serious about buying that property, I'm not going to let you go bug every single one of my tenants to go in. Like, how does this even work?
So yeah, the process is very simple, right? First, you get initial numbers from the seller or from his broker, and then they schedule what they call a property tour, right? So you'll get to come in, talk to someone from their office about the property. You'll walk around the property, look at the buildings, right? They'll let you in 2, 3, 4 apartments that are usually vacant. And then you come in and you put an LOI, a letter of intent.
Okay.
That's not a contract at this point. This is just a letter of intent. If you and the seller are in the same ballpark, there's probably going to be a little bit of negotiation back and forth. And then you go into contract. You don't get to see all the units until you're in a contract. And then once we get a contract, we have a feasibility period, which is just like the option period in a single family house. It ranges from 14 to 60 to 120, depends on the size of the portfolio that you're buying. For 100 units, I would assume 21 to 30 days is what is reasonable in this market today. And we specifically do walk every single unit. I know a lot of the buyers out there just sample 5-10% of the units. We insist on walking every single unit. So 100 units usually takes us about a day and a half to 2 days.
Okay. Let's look at the option, right? So this is something that in my business, we want to get the lowest option possible, but there's industry standards as far as, how everything plays out on a percentage base for certain types of businesses. Are y'all having to bring, let's say, it is industry standard 5%, 10%, 1%, or whatever you can agree with the seller? Because on a $2-3 million property, you could be putting up 10, 15, I don't even know, like what size option are you putting up on, let's say, a $2 million property? And if you don't close, that's a lot of risk.
So there is option and there is earnest money, right? Just like in residential. The earnest money is usually 1 to 2% of the total deal. And the option is usually, I've seen it anywhere between $100 to $5,000, right? It ranges, depends on the size of the property, depends on the negotiation, right? It's a lot more free form than it is on residential, where you have the realtor's forms and then you get stuck with that and that's it. And then some sellers, and again, this is a seller's market, so the sellers get to put a lot of the terms on their own. So some sellers insist that your earnest money will go hard, or some of it will go hard at a certain period of time, right? After 10 days, after 14 days. And then after the due diligence period is over, all your earnest money is on the line, of course. You still have your financing period, and then all the way to closing. So if you got all the way to closing and you fail to close, then yes, you lost all your earnest money.
Yep. So on the first deal, you got owner financing given to you, but you're probably not funding them all with getting seller carrybacks. What is a typical way? Like most people, you can probably get, I believe, probably an 80% commercial loan, so you're having to come up with the other 20%. Is this kind of how you're funding a lot of them, or what's the main way that you're going about the financing side of things?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size of the property. If you're looking at the 20, 30, 50 units, then anywhere under $1.2, $1.5 million, then you're working with a local bank. These guys will usually stay within the 75 loan to value, and then they will only give you, let's say, a 5-year term with a 20-year amortization rate. That's not a great loan, right? But most people have no choice, because when you're in that range between 5 units and higher up to $1.5 million, agency will not pick this up, right? And when I say agency, there are agencies like FHA. There's agencies called Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and they do larger commercial loans. So when you cross that threshold, now you're looking at Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. They will go to 75 or 80% loan to value, and the terms are completely different. These are 10 to 12 to 15 years term, and they are 30 years fully amortized. So, but on the other hand, they don't let you out very easy, right? If you want to, there's heavy prepayment penalties versus your local banks will not have prepayment penalties, right?
Yep.
So there's always pros and cons to everything.
So you've done
okay,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
You still have to come up with that 25% down payment plus all the closing costs, right? Your lawyer fees and your application fees and so on. So when we get to those larger ones, what we do is we structure a group investment, right? And other people call it syndication. And that is a different structure. If you want, we can talk more about that.
Yeah, that's actually what I was just about to ask you about. Because, I mean, even if you've done very well, right? Even if you made millions of dollars, if you're in this business, eventually you're going to spend that because we make money off our money. And if you're not leveraged out, but remember, keep reserves, guys. Don't be stupid. But if you're not leveraged out, you're not really doing the business correctly. So you do have to come in and bring partners. And syndication is a real big deal in the apartment world because we're playing with a huge amount of money. You're linking up with other investors. You're going into a syndication. Are you doing this nationally? Or how would someone go about this? Do you have to get a private placement memorandum? Like, what do you have to do to be compliant with SEC? Because this is something that people need to understand when they start raising money. It's not just the wild, wild west out there, right?
Yeah. So start with a disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a security lawyer. That whatever you do, make sure you talk to someone that are professional in that field. Especially when you deal with government agencies like the SEC. I always say these guys don't mess with you. They don't give you fines. They take you to jail. So we keep everything above water and super clean.
Yeah.
Not just because of that, but this is a very good reason to do that. Now, real estate, I love real estate because it's creative, right? You can do a lot of things in many, many creative ways. If you're buying something that is, let's say, $1 million, and you need $250,000, $300,000 for everything, it's not that hard to build a small partnership, 2, 3, 4 investors, and that's just an LLC with general partners. It doesn't have to be syndication. Syndication has a lot of costs that get involved with it, right? So that's one way to do things, right? I call it JV, call it a partnership, call it whatever you want, but that's one way to do things. When you look at the larger properties, when you need to raise $1-2 million, that depends on your friends. That gets harder to find 3-4 people to pull this off.
Yeah.
So if you have friends like that, have them give me a call. But
have them call me.
Yeah. But otherwise, you have to fall into the syndication structure, and in the syndication structure, this is where we no longer have 3-4 guys buying the property. Now you have an LLC that buys the property, and that LLC is selling shares to the investors.
Okay.
Right? So in that format, you have a general partner, which is the syndicator, the syndication lead, and they are the managing member of that LLC. They are the ones that are allowed to sell shares of that LLC to other investors. The investors that come in as limited partner, which is great, especially to investors like lawyers and doctors that walk around with big bullseye on their back in our litigious society, right? So for them, we keep our investors 3 layers away from risk on whatever happens on the property, right? The first layer is the LLC owns the property, so you got the protection of an LLC. The second layer is their limited partner in that LLC. And the third layer is all of our loans are non-recourse, right? So there's a huge advantage to the investors that come in as passive investors or limited partners into those LLCs because they get complete distance from liability.
Yep.
Right? That does not mean there's no risk. It just means there's no liability.
Yep.
And then when you structure these things, you have to file with the SEC. You have to create something called, like you mentioned earlier, private placement memorandum. You have to show the investors all the paperwork of the operating agreement of that LLC. And this is where really it gets a little bit complicated, and you have to pay a lot of money to the lawyers to set it up. But it's really the best way to do it, and you got to make sure you stand in compliance. And there's two main ways to do that. There is the 506B and the 506C. I always find it hard to remember which one is only accredited investors and which one is the friends and family. So the way I find it easy to remember is 506B stands for Be My Friend. So that one is friends and family. 506C stands for credited, so only accredited investors. And do you want me to explain what's the difference between accredited investors and not?
Okay. Yeah, that's important because people that are going to jump in apartments are going to have to understand this when they get out there. So let's go and talk about what makes an accredited investor.
Okay, so let me throw in a little plug-in to our securities lawyer. He's got a great book. It's called his name is Gene Trowbridge. It's available on Amazon, and it explains everything you need to know about a syndication. So that's a great book to get started and understand how you build syndications. The 506B is designed for friends and family kind of equity raise, where you have a previous substantial relationship with the investors before you offer them the deal. That means your friends, your family, your colleagues, that your high school buddies, right? Your college friends, anyone that you already have an established relationship before you approach them with, hey, do you want to invest money in this thing? So it cannot be I put a post on the forum and he called me. It cannot be I put an ad on Facebook, right? You're not allowed to advertise this thing. This is complete private and closed circle.
Yep.
The 506C is designed only for accredited investors. By the way, you can get accredited investors in your 506B. That's allowed. The 506C gives you more permissions to advertise, to announce to the world, we're doing this thing, this is the returns we're going to do. And accredited investors are defined by the IRS. There is a few ways to measure that. It's either the investors are making $200,000 a year alone, or $300,000 if they file jointly for the last 2 years. That's one criteria. Another criteria could be if you have a net worth of over $1 million, not including your personal home. And there are other criteria, like if you are a bank or if you are a trustee, or there's other criteria for that are not regular people,
yep.
Right? But for regular people, these are the two criteria.
Yeah, so it's very important what Justice just told you guys, because I see people doing illegal things all the time, and they don't even know what they don't know, right? Especially when it comes to raising money, guys, you just can't walk up to someone and say, hey, I got this great deal, put money into it. You have like I don't know if the 3-day 30 touch rule applies for what y'all doing, but there's just lots of stuff, especially people wholesaling, and there's guys, just make sure you're doing it right, because you don't want to get in trouble. So, basically
and the SEC doesn't care if you don't know.
Yeah. So what you basically, is that, we went over just a second ago, is that basically a co-op is what y'all are doing, or is that a little different than what a co-op is?
No, it's not a co-op, because it's just a different structure. We're basically selling shares like Apple sells their shares, right? But we get exemption from registering at the NASDAQ or the NYSE or any other of those stock exchanges, because it's a private placement memorandum.
Okay, so when they own shares, they're getting a piece of the profit. They're not getting, like, how does it, like, how, I mean, you can structure it different ways. Like, are you able just to bring in people where they just are an interest, simple debt finance loan to you, or are you giving up equity share? Like what's the best way to do it if you could structure it the best way you want it? I mean, obviously sometimes we have to do deals. Like if you were going to make $1 million profit and someone wanted 900,000, you're going to do the deal regardless, because you're going to make $100,000 if that was the only person you could get to fund it. What would be the best way to fund this deal? Is it the way we just went over?
Well, it's very simple. The best way is the way everybody's happy.
Yep.
Right. And that's really what this business is all about. Right. And when people start getting into the bits and bytes and why is he getting this and why is he getting that, then it's not a good deal. Right. If our investors get the returns they're happy with, they shouldn't care what we're making. And if we're making good money, we shouldn't be greedy about not giving our investors good investment, right, and good returns. So the way we do things, and I know not everybody do that, but the way we do things is we put everything on the table, right? When you look at an offering memorandum that comes from us, you'll also see every dollar we're going to make in this transaction. We're not hiding it. There's no surprises. We're not philanthropists. We're doing this for profit, right? And everybody needs to feel comfortable with what they're getting in a transaction. So a lot of the syndication have a structure of investors gets paid first, which is what called preferred returns, right? And then there's a split between the investors and the leads on the remaining of the profits. There's other ways I've seen that done. I've seen, like you said earlier, investors come in as only debt partners. I've seen investors that usually it's more of equity partners than debt partners, right? But I've seen both ways. For us, we do equity partners. We make sure that not only you get a piece of the profits on an ongoing basis, you also get a piece when we sell the property, right? And you enjoy the upside of building equity in real estate.
Okay, so let's talk about, we got a phone ringing there. You're gonna take that out real quick. I'm gonna ask him. So there's lots of different ways people can do this business, lots of different exit strategies. Some apartment investors, their goal is the cash flow. Some want to get a house or get an apartment complex, fix it up, let the appreciation happen over a few years and sell it off and make their money that way. So like people listening to this right now, obviously know you're an expert. They may not want to take the time to go out and learn this. They want to come work with you. What's y'all's main exit strategy? What can they expect if they come to get in on one of these syndication type of deals with you? Are y'all keeping them long-term, real long-term plays because some people don't want to tie their money up forever? Or is it more of a, let's get stabilized, let's ride that money maker phase up until they're at the top of the market, cash out, do it again? Like how do you kind of do your deals?
So really, we look at every project and figure out what's the best exit strategy for that project. There will be a project where we say we want to get in and out faster. A project that we want to say that one is a legacy one. We want to keep it as long as we can, right? It has to be, like I said earlier, the best deal is the one that everybody's happy. And some investors want a quick turnaround, and some investors want, and they're okay with higher risk. And some investors want low risk, and they're okay with lower returns as long as it holds for longer period. What we believe in is all of my real estate transactions have been following three rules. And it doesn't matter if it's a $20,000 condo, $400,000 house, or $20 million apartment complex, right? The first rule is you make your money when you buy. You can't beat that one. Everybody thinks rule number one is location, but no, it's not. This is rule number one. You make your money when you buy. Rule number two is location, because that's the one thing you cannot change about a property, and that's true to apartment complexes as well. And rule number three is buy for cash flow, because hope is not a strategy. Okay? And when you go and you do a flip on a single family house, you can go in and be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and you can get out of it. The chances of the market completely dropping from underneath you in this period of time exist. Like it happened in 07 and 8 to a lot of people, but it's not as risky.
Yep.
When you want to flip an apartment complex that has 200 units or 100 units in it, it's a 2 to 3 year process. The chances of the market completely dropping in underneath you is a lot higher. So if you're in the business of flipping apartment complexes, realize that the risk is a lot higher.
Yep.
For us, our hold period are usually 5 to 7 years, but we have a mechanism that we try to either refi or add a supplemental loan, which is very much like a home line of credit. So we can cash most of our investors' money out within 2 to 3 years, right? To get you some of the benefits of getting a lot of your cash back and reducing the risk of our investors after 24 months, but still keep a long-term hold and getting great returns on your investment.
So like what is a typical time frame from start to close when let's say you send out an LOI, letter of intent, then you go through your due diligence process, and then you go to closing, because it's not like a quick in and out, right? So kind of a time frame from start to finish. Is this a month, 2 months, 6 months, longer? Like what can someone expect if they are going out today to start trying to buy an apartment?
So my record is 23 days.
That's pretty fast.
That was so fast, my property management didn't realize what's going on. But that was owner financing. We didn't wait for loans. We didn't wait for banks, right? We just termed, walked the property, and went to closing, right? So the long pole in that tent was title. But normally it's about a 2 to 3 months process on I'd say 80 to 200 units. Anything larger than that would probably take you 45 to I don't know, 3 months, 45 days to 3 months, depends on the terms and the financing and how investors you need to get the equity raised and so on. There's a lot of factors in it.
Okay, so that's not too bad. There's a couple of last things I want to go over here. So let's talk about location. Where's the opportunities? Where should people be looking? And then we'll go into the property management side of things, because that's clearly a very important part of owning an apartment complex. Because if you mess up on the numbers, or if you can't keep this thing cranking and the cash flow's not coming out, you're in some trouble. So let's talk about looking for these properties first. Location. What are some good indicators that this is a safe buy? Are you wanting to be close to the heart of the city? Or, I mean, you don't obviously want to just go buy an apartment out in a field somewhere, right? So let's kind of talk about what you look for, what makes it a good deal for you, and then certain parts of the country where good opportunities are at.
Yeah, so sometimes good opportunity and good locations don't go hand in hand, right? And that's where your risk flex, your risk tolerance really comes into play, right? So if you go downtown Dallas or uptown Dallas, right, you'll buy at a 5 cap, 5.5 at best, right? Which means you're not going to get a lot of cash flow. You're not going to get a lot of returns out of it, but it's probably a really good place to buy, right? Great location. A lot of people are interested in living over there. Plano is a great example, right? But there's not a lot of value there. And you have to remember, when you do a syndication, you want to pay your investors, but you also want to get paid yourself, right? So usually you need a little bit higher margins than you would if you just buy for yourself. So we gave up on North Dallas and what's going on here, because recently there's been a lot of upbidding and overbuying, overpaying. There's a lot of foreign money that pours in here, and they're just trying to get the money out of the country, or they're trying to get a tax benefit based on the rules in their country. So, for example, Japanese investors have a rule back home, I heard, that if the property they're buying is 23 years or older, they can write off the entire investment from their taxes day one.
Wow.
They don't care if they're making money. They made all that money back just writing off the taxes, right? So they'll overpay. So for us, we're looking outside the core city, right? We're looking at secondary market. We're looking at other states like Oklahoma and Kansas and other states around us. And the criteria really is about economic drivers. When we go to a place, we got to show that there's good employment, that there is good economic growth, there is good population growth in the city that will justify an increase in rent and increase in value of the property. Now, remember, I said hope is not a strategy, but it does not mean it should not be part of your looking forward strategy, right? Don't count on it, but it's always better to make sure that you're covered for the downturn.
Yep.
Right? And places that have no economic growth and places that have no economic drivers are going to get hit a lot harder when the market cycle turns.
What's your thoughts on, I mean, it's not just here in Dallas, it's all over the country right now. I mean, I can't tell you how many skyrise cranes we see. There's a lot of new builds going up. There's a lot of people building new 200, 300, 400 unit apartments or bigger here. Some of them are just now the front edge of this big trend right now in Dallas coming on the market. Some of them are getting ready to come on, and then there's some that are getting close. They're mid-development. What's your take on when all these start flooding on the market incrementally? How's this going to affect things in your opinion?
So real estate is a cycle, right? And we've seen that in the last few cycles happen at the same time. Developers are always behind the cycle a little bit because they're playing musical chairs, right? And they're hoping not to be the ones left when the music stops, right? Without a chair. So development has always been the highest risk, highest reward in real estate. And it doesn't matter which kind of real estate you're doing, because you're getting in at cost. But with the hurricanes that we've had and the increase in build all over the country, costs of building have increased dramatically. So today, to build a brand new multifamily property, you're going to pay about $150,000 a door in our area, right? If you want to just look at the 5% rule, right, you'll need rents that are higher than $1,500. And in our area, there's a lot of talks about job growth and Toyota's coming in and FedEx and farmers and all these other big corporations. But we've built a lot more than these people are coming.
Yeah.
And the job growth is usually not in the core center of those IT jobs. It's in the surrounding retail and janitorial services and all these support systems and healthcare and all these things. But the guy that works at GameStop, he can't afford a $1,600 one-bedroom apartment.
Yep.
So who's going to live in those? So at some point, what's going to happen, and it happens in the 80s and happens in the 90s and happens in the 2000s, is that those A-class properties are going to start doing concessions and it's going to start dropping prices, and they're going to let anyone in just to get occupancy high, and that's going to filter down and impact everybody else.
No, I agree with you.
That's just the cycle.
No, I agree. It's happening in the single-family world too. We're seeing a slowdown here in Dallas, even though we're still in a really hot market. They've overbuilt in that 300 to 600K price range. There's not enough jobs and not enough incomes to support those houses. And so right now for these builders, it's a race to get their product on the market, because the last ones in line are going to get wiped out. And like one of my buddies, says a stupid joke. He's like, if a developer or really even an investor offers to pay for lunch for you, go ahead and take them up on it, because they may not be able to pay for you tomorrow. Right. So it's interesting. So let's talk about, before we let you go here, the property management process, kind of any good tips you have on this, any software using. I know people use like Buildium. This is very important, because if you don't have a good property management system in place, you can have a lot of leakage, and bleed out a lot of money that should be captured. And we just talked earlier in this podcast, a lot of the value add is getting a better property management system in place and replacing the old failing one, right? So let's talk about property management here.
So I'm a big proponent of using a third-party property management company. And I'll justify it in a few ways, right? The first is there's really no way to replace experience, right? These guys have been doing that for decades. They know what they're doing. They have encountered most every challenge you can think of, right? Because most people, myself included, will not have the experience of knowing what to do when half the apartment complex goes on fire, or a driver drives into a building, or you have a gang war going on, even though you tried really hard to keep them out, right? Most landlords don't do screening well, even on single family, right? So, and who's going to keep up with fair housing rules, right? So all these things are a lot of things that needs to be done, and I don't want to do them, right? I give the same example all the time. I'm really good at taking out the trash. Don't want to make a career out of it, right? So I prefer to pay my property management company to do the work. Now, it's ridiculously tempting to say, wait, I got an on-site property manager and I got on-site 2 maintenance guys. I can manage them. Oh, sure. Let's talk about that for a second, right? You got a $10 million property. What do you think the pay grade of the on-site manager is?
I wouldn't even know.
40, 50 a year? Would you trust someone at that pay grade to make decisions for your $10 million property?
Doesn't seem smart, does it?
No. So that's what I'm saying. Put everything away. Just look at the pay grade, right? And I wouldn't put a $10 million property decision in that pay grade hands. Now, goes back to how you value your time. Can I guide those people through dealing with a resident or dealing with a water heater burst or dealing with a fire? Yes. But does it worth my time versus me going out and finding the next deal, me and talking to my investors, me and talking to our lenders, building relationship with brokers, right? So I look at it from dollar productive hours. I'm willing to pay that price to a professional property management company, knowing that I can do better with my time.
Yep. So a lot of people have like on-site managers, and they maybe sometimes give them like a unit to live in as part of their compensation. Is this common industry standard? I've heard people doing this, or do you do this? Or
So this is common with self-managing owners of smaller properties, that they'll take one of the residents and make them kind of like a house mom, and maybe it's a handy guy that can help fix stuff, and maybe it's a house mom that can go around and collect rent or whatever. That's really where the challenge is with the smaller apartment complexes, because when you're below, say, 70, 80 units, you can't afford a full-time staff. Right? So you got to have to find ways to work through this, which is why I prefer to pay my property management company, because they have leasing agents, they have maintenance people, they have all these teams that they don't live on your property, but they can easily get to your property and handle work orders and handle everything else. So yeah, I've seen that happen, but it's usually on smaller properties with owners trying to manage themselves.
Plus, another benefit is they probably have a really good system of managing the numbers and keeping rent rolls and records for when you go back on the back end to sell it. The more information you have, the easier it is for that buyer to make a decision. Whereas if you come with a bunch of napkins and you're like, hey, I think I got this, right? They're going to be like, what the hell is this, right? Which I see all the time from people. I mean, how often does a CPA, when someone first gets hired on, they come in with like a big box and they like throw it on their desk. They're like, here you go, figure it out, right? So guys, keep
shoebox owner.
It's so important. I'm not saying that was me, but it could have been, but I'm not saying it was when I started using the CPA the first time. Jospeh, I appreciate you coming on here. Is there anything we didn't go over that you think is really important? Obviously I'm not an apartment expert, but we kind of touched on quite a bit. You gave a lot of good information. Obviously people are going to want to work with you. We'll give you a chance to give your contact information here in a second. But is there anything really important that I kind of missed on for potential apartment buyers?
Yeah, and this is just one last piece of advice, and it's right for single families and apartment complexes, right? Realize that we're pretty much at the top of the market, right? Are we 6 months away, a year away, 2 years away from it turning? I don't have a crystal ball, right? But we're pretty much at the top. So you got to go in with eyes wide open. You got to build your buffers to mitigate the risk, because losing your property, losing a $10 million property or a $5 million property, even a $1 million property, because you didn't realize you're coming in at the top of the cycle is going to be really bad.
Yep.
And hope is not a strategy. Keep that in mind, and that will protect you.
That's some good advice. So if they want to work with you, if they want to lend on your deals or go into a syndication with you, or if they just come across leads, right? I'm sure there's some way, there's got to be a way that people can get paid or compensated that way, kind of like a bird dog fee. I don't know how y'all do it in the apartment world, but how do they reach you? Let's give all your contact information out, guys, and we'll put it below the video. And if you're thinking about getting into apartments, give Jospeh a call.
Yeah, my website, ebgacquisitions.com. You got my phone number there. You got my email address there. Feel free. I also have this would help some of your investors and your listeners. If you have a spouse that kind of resists you going in and buying a real estate investment, I've written a book. It's on Amazon. It's called The Real Estate College Fund. And it's just a different way to look at why real estate investment is good. So look it up.
Always a gatekeeper. Anytime you're in sales or in type of business, there's always someone that you're going to have to convince to go along with your idea. So that's a good idea. Jospeh, I appreciate you coming on, guys. And this one we're going to wrap up. I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, man. Thanks.